So you're back for more. Welcome back to part 2 of scary and disturbing true stories. I kind of want to make this kind of a regular thing where I post scary stories on the weekends. Well, get ready because these stories are just as intense as the other ones. In my town in the early 90s, there was a notorious killer that had all of BC, Canada on watch. My wife's mother, years and years before I knew them, had been home alone while her husband was in England, doing tree surgeon work. She was in her laundry room when a man walked up from her basement, completely scaring her. She freaked out and said, "What the heck are you doing here?" He said he was friends with her husband and was just coming to see if he was there. Apparently he told them that he could just walk in, which she knew was BS. She was smart enough to tell him that he was just at the store and would be back any minute. He said he would wait outside for him. As soon as he left, she called the police, but he was long gone by the time they got there. 2 weeks later, the killer was caught. His mugshot was put on TV, and it was the guy in her house. Well, that definitely could have gone worse. Happened to me. Have posted about it before. I was around 11 years old, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a man straddling on top of me with his hands over my mouth and nose. He told me to roll over and not scream. I rolled onto the floor and tried to scream bloody murder. I say tried because when you are truly terrified, it can take a second to find your voice. My mom heard me screaming and came in and fought with the guy. He was at least 6 feet, and she was 5'3", and scared him enough with the fighting and screaming that he took off out the window he had come in through. Never did catch him. Man, what are these people even trying to do when they just climb into a window of a house where there's people sleeping there? I was working the evening shift at a gas station. A man comes in all disoriented. I go to help him out. He has a gash on his head and doesn't know where he is. I couldn't see any crashes around, so I assumed he had fallen or something. Normally, we're supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store. I, being a nice human being, went to help while calling the police and EMS. They got there and checked him out. They thought his head may have been fractured and took him to the ER. I went back to work. Cops stopped back for some coffee a few hours later. They told me the guy got hit by a baseball bat trying to break into a little girl's bedroom, and he was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. I never left the register area at night again. I always think it's crazy that you may come across somebody that may be so evil, and yet you won't even know it at the time. A headless, limbless torso was found in the bushes at a rest stop in the town where I grew up. They never found the rest of the body parts or the murderer. She wasn't even identified until about a decade later. She was a prostitute that had been estranged from her family. My mom's theory is that a truck driver from out of state did it, dismembered her, dumped her torso at the rest stop, and scattered the rest of her over state lines. Could have been an isolated incident, or it could be a serial killer. We might not ever know. When it comes to stories like this, we usually only ever see, maybe a glimpse of the aftermath. But it can be kind of scary to actually imagine the incident as it happened. We usually don't sympathize with the killers or anything, but it's probably a really terrifying experience for them too. Years ago, my now husband worked for an industrial laundry company in their head office when a PR disaster happened that also mentally screwed up a number of people. Their company collected laundry from large hospitals and medical-type business care homes and cleaned them. You can imagine the sort of heavy-duty cleaning, bleaching, boiling needed to remove those sorts of biological contaminants. One day, a laundry cart went through the usual bleaching and boiling cycle before it dropped out into a conveyor belt to be sorted for drying and pressing, when there was a horrid scream. A small newborn's baby body had been discovered tangled up amongst the sheets. It had been cooked. The laundry workers were distraught. The whole place had to be shut down, police were called, and the laundry tracked back to the hospital to discover what happened. It turns out that a stillborn baby had been left in a cot waiting to be taken down to the hospital mortuary after the parents had said their goodbyes and covered it with the blanket, but somehow one of the nurses hadn't realized. So just grabbed up all of the linen out of the cot and off the bed in the delivery room with the body bundled inside and emptied it into the laundry hamper/trolley thing. The other nurses and parents assumed the baby had been collected by the mortuary to be stored awaiting their funeral decisions. The laundry was found not to be to blame, but the parents were devastated and the hospital took a lot of flack. The poor laundry workers who discovered the body ended up being given counseling before eventually quitting. The laundry did amend its practice to individually emptying each laundry hamper into the machines instead of just tipping them in to stop anything like that from happening again. There are jobs out there like emergency workers or pathologists that you get into the job kind of knowing that you're going to see some disturbing things. But in reality, almost any job can see horrible things like this. Have you heard of the Nazi that was so bad that other Nazis, in particular fellow SS Nazis, constantly tried to get him and his unit disbanded and arrested? No? Well, his name was Oskar Dirlewanger, and his unit was nicknamed the Black Hunters, or the Dirlewanger Brigade. Oskar Dirlewanger was an early adopter of the Nazi Party. He had been thrown in jail before for being a pedophile. Eventually, when World War II broke out and the healthy, ideal Germans were dying in droves on the Eastern Front, Oscar's old pal, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, granted him a command of a unit made up originally of German poachers, and eventually German criminals being held in civilian jails and camps, and military criminals. His unit was essentially designated as a rearguard unit meant to hunt down enemy partitions, or in most cases, civilians in occupied countries. Oscar Dirlewanger SS unit was responsible for many atrocities. Some atrocities so barbaric and bad, other SS units reported him and his unit for their atrocities. A few examples, which have been popularized in film, include taking an entire village in Belarus and putting them in a church, locking the doors and setting the church ablaze. Anyone who tried to escape was shot by machine guns and rifles. This unit raped, tortured, and murdered its way through the Eastern and Central Europe. During the Warsaw Uprising, they were sent to help squelch the uprising. One of their atrocities committed was going to a children's hospital, telling the nurses and staff that they were there to secure the church. Okay, once the church was secured, they raped the female staff, and some of the wounded and sick female children victims, and then went around shooting everyone. If anyone was found to have survived, they were bayoneted. These guys were so horrible that other Nazis looked down their noses at them, and constantly filed complaints and reports against them, but with no real success. Thankfully, by the end of the war, this unit was destroyed, and its leaders and criminal soldiers were hunted down like rabid animals. You know, whenever we hear about terrible things that happened, particularly around World War II, I've heard the argument made a lot of times. It's like, how can God be real if he allowed something like the Holocaust to happen? Or how can he allow such horrible, evil things to happen in the world? Well, when you really put it into perspective, we see the Holocaust and all of this stuff as like the worst of the worst that's ever happened. So of course the bar is extremely low. But who's to say that maybe there wasn't something potentially worse that didn't end up happening? I mean, there's always going to be something that was the worst thing that ever happened in human history, so maybe we'll never even know about some things that were even worse that didn't end up happening. Well, this one was quite dreadful, for me at least. Whilst I was working back in 2006, I was working inside of a multi-story car park. I came down in the lift from the top floor where I was working at the time. As I got out the lift, there was a woman in her late 40s, I would say with graying hair and a maroon handbag. We brushed shoulders as I got out of the lift. I apologized. She gave me a very blank look. I walked out to get some food, not thinking at the time much more than that. Although, when I think about it, the lady appeared to look quite sad. I returned with my noodles around 20 to 30 minutes later. At this point, I got back and the police were everywhere. The lady had jumped from the top floor. I knew it was her from the handbag laying on the floor. Gosh, if I had stopped and spoke to her, or left for lunch a little later, I may have been able to stop her jumping. Yeah, stories like this I feel can be very surreal, where you can just walk past somebody without even thinking much of it, and then shortly after, your whole perspective is just completely changed. In 3rd grade, a guy came to our school and held our class hostage. He had already killed his wife and was there to kill his kid. The administrators convinced him that the kid was not there, and to take one of their cars and leave. After threatening to kill us multiple times, tying up the gym teacher, and dragging someone's grandma around with a knife at her neck, he finally left about 30 minutes later. The police caught him in Indiana on his way to kill his parents. He was convinced that the world was ending, and he was killing everyone he loved to spare them. The school did worse than nothing. They lied to the parents, and no assistance was given to either the kids or the teachers involved. The gym teacher never came back, and every time she would see one of the kids at the store or whatever, she had a breakdown. Several of us had PTSD, undiagnosed for decades. We just thought it was normal. In the 70s, the Chicago public school system was more concerned about their jobs and lawsuits, so they covered it up. It's always freaky when there's killers out there who feel like they're doing something good by killing people. There's something about it that makes it just a little bit more horrific. So one of my friends had someone following her home, hiding in the bushes so they couldn't be seen. She booked it to her house, got inside, and he was watching the house from the outside. She called the cops. They come along quietly and got the jump on him. He had condoms, handcuffs, and a knife. They got his DNA, and it turned out that he was linked to half a dozen rapes in the area. She credits her regimen of running sprints to outrun him that night, and firmly believes that she would have been raped if she couldn't outrun him then. I mean, yeah, good on her. I hope that more girls are in better shape and carry weapons so that they can actually protect themselves. In the spring of 2001, I was just ending my shift at a major hospital in New York. I headed back to my apartment, entertained my daughter with random conversation for a while, had a meal, and was chilling out. Business as usual. Later that night, my mother came by and took me back to the very same hospital where I worked. We were conversing in the car, and nothing seemed out of sorts at all. She never mentioned where we were headed, and I had no idea of the destination until we actually arrived. When we arrived at the hospital, I keep getting questioned about who I was. including who I really was, where I grew up, who my daughter was, where I lived, and more. Battery after battery of third degree, coming out of absolutely nowhere. I had no clue what was going on, or why anyone was interrogating me this way. Fast forward to about 3 days later or so, I found myself crapping in a chair, calmly looking out of a lovely view from my apartment window, except this wasn't my apartment. In a quiet panic, I took stock of my surroundings and realized I was at the end of a hallway, and I'd been here before. It was the hospital where I worked, but it wasn't in New York. It was Portland, and it was the psych floor. In an instant, I had no idea why I was there, the day or time it was, nor what had gone on since my last shift on the floors beneath. It turns out that I was, indeed, working a regular shift several days prior. The story is that I walked off the job with no warning nor explanation, went to my mother's place, and was rambling on about what I needed to do in the city the next day. She took me to the ER, where I reported living in New York City, complete with some bogus address and phone number, with my daughter. I was claiming that my little sister was my daughter. They admitted me, and I didn't break back into generally accepted reality for several days. When I came to, as described above, I had absolutely no idea what had happened, why I was locked up again, nor any memory whatsoever of what I'd said or done after that instant of walking off my shift. Statistically, probably no one reading this has been blessed with the misfortune of dissociative fugue. Sitting in that chair by the window at the end of the hospital hallway, when literally 1 instant earlier I'd been casually going about my job, felt just as disorienting and jarring as you'd imagine. I know this isn't a serial killer or drunk driver story, but it's absolutely true, and it's the single most terrifying event of my life. I wouldn't wish that instant reality shift sensation on my very worst enemy. Psychosis is a heck of a drug. I think stories like this is why so many people question reality, and they think we're all living in some kind of simulation. How is there any way to tell if you're living in reality? During World War II, an American airplane crashed near the Japanese island of Chichijima. There were 9 servicemen on board. 1 was rescued by an American submarine. The other 8 were taken by the Japanese. Don't want to go into details, but through some time and events, the Japanese ended up eating those servicemen. But that's not the weird part. The one serviceman who was rescued, that was George H.W. Bush. There seems to be a lot of crazy coincidence stories of people who survived and then went on to be some very prominent figure. The Battle of the Austerlitz Fortress, 1915. German troops attempted to gas the Russian defenders out, as the fort had been a thorn in the side of the Germans since the outbreak of the war. The gas succeeded in killing almost 3 whole companies. The Germans then advanced across the fields, expecting the fortress to be empty and an easy victory. From within the fortress, Russian troops emerged, coughing up blood and lung fragments, covered in bandages made up as improvised gas masks as well as chemical burns. They returned rifle and light artillery fire at the advancing Germans. The German troops didn't bother firing back, as they just ran back to their lines. Their commanders claimed, "They're already dead, give it 20 minutes and go take the place." To which the soldiers remarked, "It's not men protecting that place, but the devil." Austerlitz Fortress never fell during the war, as when the German troops went back months after, there was already fresh defenders. I know this story is much different from the others that people have said, but it's the one I could think of as truly terrifying. It's really just hard to imagine just how horrible it would be to fight in pretty much any war, but particularly back when technology was so bad that even if you did get serious injuries, it would probably be even more painful to fix them. My mom didn't tell me this story for the longest time, I think just so she wouldn't unnecessarily worry me when I was younger. But my parents split up when I was about 4 years old, and my mom and my sisters stayed in a small townhouse for a few years before moving in with my stepdad. Anyway, while we were at the townhouse for I think less than a year, my mom heard something in her room in the middle of the night, and when she woke up to go look, there was a man in her room. She audibly gasps and got out of her bed to either fight or run to our room. She couldn't really decide because she was pumped full of adrenaline. The guy ended up running out of the back door, and when the police came, they found signs of forced entry. She never told any of us the full story because we were still sound asleep the entire time, but she ended up explaining more of it as we got older. We never found out who it was. The police weren't able to either. Their best guess was that he broke in to rob the place, and was just as surprised to see my mom as she was to see him. They think that he thought the place was empty and it would be an easy mark, and bailed when he came face to face with the owner. I hope you guys keep weapons of some sort close to your bed when you sleep at night. A bunch of girls in my friend group decided to have a night out and ended up at a local gay club. I can't remember why, I didn't go, but I'm sort of glad I wasn't there. However, I also wish I had been, so I could have helped. Anyway, they noticed a girl on the dance floor who looked super out of place. She had sweatpants and a t-shirt on and wasn't wearing makeup and had her hair in a ponytail. She also had a backpack on. Basically, the exact opposite of typical club attire, and not at all what someone would usually wear to this place. They said that she seemed very dazed as well, and more importantly, there was a very large man grabbing her and grinding on her while she was just kind of standing there letting it happen. One of my friends tried approaching her to ask if she was alright, but the guy spoke for her and insisted that he was her boyfriend, and that she'd just had too much to drink, but that she was okay. Everyone was suspicious, but at that point there wasn't much else that they could do, so they just kept an eye on the two of them. Eventually the guy left the dance floor to go to the bar, and my friend was able to talk to this girl again. She said that she was extremely out of it, and that it seemed more likely that she had been drugged rather than just drunk. The girl managed to convey that she didn't know the man she was with and wanted to leave. So my friend grabbed her and made for the exit, but not before the guy came back. He immediately flipped out, got right in her friend's face, and started screaming at her. It escalated to the point where he eventually swung at my friend, who just barely dodged the punch. Thankfully, someone else had went and found a security guard, and they were able to prevent the guy from hurting anyone, meaning that my friends and the girl were able to leave safely. She was still super messed up when they left, so nobody could get the full story out of her, but she did say that the guy had been following her around town all day. The really scary part is that the bar staff couldn't technically do anything other than throw this guy out after my friends had left. One of them called the cops and gave them a description of the guy, but they said they couldn't really do much other than be on the lookout for him. So chances are that he's still out there somewhere and may do this again. I mean, something about that's still kind of strange. Like, she obviously wasn't dressed for the club, so I don't think that she was just there when she got drugged. I don't know, maybe he took her there. It happened to my mom's friend a couple of years back. She was driving on the highway in the middle of nowhere, as in far away from any town. Suddenly, a car that is passing on her left steers fully to the right in front of her, causing her to brake and steer very rashly. This obviously causes her to lose control and crash against a tree. She passed out, and sometime later, she couldn't really tell much time had passed, a group of Brazilians, all of this happened in Portugal, came to her rescue and told her things like, "Don't move, we're calling an ambulance, just hang on there," etc. She eventually passed out again, and about 2 hours later someone else comes and starts helping her again, and eventually the ambulance and her husband arrive. She tells them that some other people have been there before, but the guy that found her says that no one was there. When they checked the trunk, everything had been stolen, including computer, camera, etc. She later said that she remembers thinking that the car that made her crash had been following her for a while, and driving a little too close. Make of that what you want. You know, it can be pretty creepy driving on some back roads at night. I mean, most of it's gonna be completely empty, but all it really takes is one creep to set a trap out there. My wife arrived at her parents' house that she was currently living in due to health issues of her father's. She got into the house, no one else was there at the time, and instead of going further in, stopped in the first room that held the computers, which was right by the door. She went into the room and was messing around on the internet when one of the cats came into the room. Her cat, to be precise. Well, this cat was super laid back, loved everyone, and never picked fights or got aggressive. He would literally lay down and let squirrels throw pecans at him from trees, and do nothing but take it. Not tonight, however. Tonight, he was growling and hissing intermittently while standing between my wife and the entrance to the rest of the house. A laid-back, sweet old cat was acting like he was going to rip out a throat. Well, my wife decided that this was really freaking weird, so she picked up her cat and left the house. Lo and behold, she sees a cop car patrolling down the street and flagged them down. She explained the situation, and they demanded, that she stay in their cruiser while they both checked it out. Turns out they found the back door wide open. Super bad. Her parents and her never leave the door unlocked, much less open. She came to find out later from those cops that they were hunting down a serial rapist that had been spotted in the area, and that is why they were rolling down a normally safe residential street. Super spooky. Life pro tip, always trust the cat. Always trust the cat. Well, my cat's going kinda nuts right now. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to make of that. My ex's father was a sergeant of police, so I have the details on this. I was up late playing video games. My ex was asleep after surgery, so dead to the world. Back door was cracked open because the cat was out. I shut the bedroom door to keep the cat out and crawl into bed at 4:30 a.m. At 6 a.m., my ex woke up, asked me why I left the bedroom door open, and went into the living room to discover we had been robbed. We found an empty case of beer in our backyard shed. They had hung out drinking, waiting for me to go to sleep. When they were caught, it turned out they were a pretty nasty group, responsible for multiple home invasions and murders. Apparently they had checked in on us sleeping, and decided we weren't worth the trouble. My ex and I are generally light sleepers. Only her pain meds and all my night gaming sessions saved our lives. Wow, for once actually sleeping through the robbery ended up saving you. I moved into another town. I was surprised by people who looked as if they knew me, even though I saw them for the very first time. Everyone around was so rude, despite all of our sources telling how friendly people there were. I was also greeted by, "Oh no, you again?" in one place where I went for the first time. I was looking for a room to rent, and one of the owners told me that he won't rent it to me because my co-tenants saw me following and stalking them. I was like, what the heck? Am I doing things and forgetting? Is something wrong with my mental health? Then I went abroad for 3 months. No such thing was happening there. Everything was normal. I thought, guess it's just a local culture. They do that to get rid of newcomers. Once I returned, I went to a fast food to leave my CV. The guy said, "You were here a month ago and it hasn't changed. We aren't recruiting." Right, I was on another continent. I couldn't have just bought 2 airplane tickets, spent several days, and just forgetting about it. And my bank account wouldn't forget anyway. That's when I started to understand what's going on. And then one day, I finally saw myself on the CCTV, trying to steal something. Right, stealing, following people and stalking, and being disliked makes sense. There was some thief who looked exactly like me, even had similar hairstyle, which was in fashion around. As of now, I already know of 2 guys who look identically like me. Yeah, it's too bad cops never really buy that story. Well, good job to everybody who made it this far. We've read about 40 scary stories over these 2 videos. You know, after reading so many different types of stories, it's a little too easy to get just like too afraid of the world, to where you feel like you're not safe when you're at home, you're not safe when you're at a store, you're not safe when you're at school, you're not safe when you're at work. It's a scary world out there, so be careful.
Don't be shy.